Hello again, I'm Lee Kreider, producer of the Ohio Ram Show, with a special summer edition of the show, number 257. This is a picture of me in the Atlantic Ocean at Rehoboth Beach in September of 1996. I had just completed a self-supported solo tour from the Pacific Ocean near Astoria, Oregon. In this picture, you can see that I was much younger. My hair was darker. I was much thinner. I was 61 years old. I was the strongest and fittest I had ever been in my life. I simply thought that I could do anything on a bicycle. This is another photograph of me in 2001, 5 years later. It is actually my chest x-rays. I don't understand what I'm looking at. I don't know anything about chest x-rays. Those of you who have experience with this can probably look and see there is something wrong here. A few weeks after this chest x-ray and some other tests, I found myself on the operating table prepared for a thoracotomy, only to wake up and find that I just had a small hole here in my neck area and a diagnosis of something called sarcoidosis. I'd never heard of it before. Many of you probably haven't either. I've lived with that since 2001 and I've been doing very well. When I saw in the Sarcoidosis Foundation Research newsletter a sentence with the word cyclist and sarcoidosis in it, my attention was quickly drawn to that. And there was a wonderful video there of John Carlin, who is the news anchor at WSLS in Richmond, Virginia, telling about his experience with sarcoidosis and cycling. And so I thought that might make for a good show. He agreed to come on the show, and we'll have him here in just a moment with Becky Finley, the show host. In the show notes, you'll find some things about sarcoidosis. I want to particularly draw your attention to the very first link there, which will take you to his blog, where you can see the same video that caught my attention. If you don't want to watch this show, just watch that video and that'll be fine. But in the show notes, you'll find links to the Sarcoidosis Foundation. You'll find a link to the Cleveland Clinic's information on this disease, as well as a link to John's blog. With that said, let's get on and talk about something that's very personal for me, cycling and sarcoidosis. Take it away, Becky.
Today we have John Carlin from Virginia talking to us about sarcoidosis and his athletic endurance events.
Hi, everybody. How you doing?
Hi, John. How are you?
Hey, good. How are you?
Good.
So we're going to talk about this today. Yes.
Yes, we are. We are. So, John, why don't you start with telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'll just get the hat out of the way first. I'm a local news anchor in Roanoke, Virginia, at the NBC affiliate here. And I've had that job. I do the evening newscast, the 5, 5:30, and 6, and the 11 o'clock newscast. And I've been working in some version of that capacity at this station pretty much since 1987. So I've been here for a long time in this market. I have been a cyclist and a runner, marathon runner. Run the Boston Marathon a couple of times, qualified a third time, but opted not to run it. So, I'm not... I've always been kind of like an age grouper, I would guess. I've never won a race, never come close to winning a race. So that's that. But I've always been a cyclist. More recently, I've become a pretty avid cyclist and was really enjoying that. And then you mentioned sarcoidosis, and been hit with this thing, and we'll talk about that throughout the course of our interview here. And it's really curtailed my cycling, mostly due to the medications that I have to take to try and get it under control. Basically, what I have is a big knot, a sarcoid, if you will, located at the base of my neck, and it's blocking signal from my brain to the lower parts of my body, which causes, at this point, I mean, as bad as it is every day and awkward, it's extreme numbness. But if it gets worse, if this gets larger, then I'll be. The doctors have said that I won't be able to walk.
So John,
yeah, go ahead.
I'm not real familiar with what a sarcoid or a sarcoidosis is. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Because I'm not real familiar.
Yeah. So basically, it's an autoimmune disease or illness.
Mm-hmm.
I'm never quite sure which is the proper term there, and it forms these clusters of globules in your body, and it can happen anywhere in your body. It can happen in the muscles, can happen in your heart. It most often happens in your lungs, and it can happen in your nervous system. And for me, it's that cluster of globules has decided that it wants to attach itself on my spinal cord. And so they went in and did a biopsy. They thought it was a tumor because they've been tracking it with MRIs and it was growing. And everybody thought tumor, which was a terrible scenario.
Yeah.
And they thought, well, we'll go in there and we'll open you up and we'll get a biopsy. And if we can, we'll scrape it off. Well, it's all intertwined in the fibers of my spinal cord. So there's no way to just take it away. Mm-hmm. So they shrink it with a drug called, prednisone. Steroids is your first attack. And then they use a variety of other drugs that are often used for people who have arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, cancer, other things that are used to shrink something in your body. Because basically what happens is when you have an autoimmune deficiency, you get inflammation, and then you have to fight this inflammation. So there's a bunch of drugs out there that people who are familiar with autoimmune diseases will know: methotrexate, Remicade, and then I'm taking a chemo drug right now as well every 3 weeks via IV. I have to go to the hospital, which is called, the short name for it is Cytoxan. So right now I'm on high doses of steroids and chemo, and that's worse than the disease. Mm-hmm. But it's keeping the disease in check. So what do you do? As a cyclist, and you're a triathlete, and as a former runner, everything is a sufferfest, right? And your badge of honor is how hard can you push to either beat your own goals or to beat somebody else, if you're good enough to beat somebody else. But you want to do as well as you can. And so I'm just applying that mentality to pushing through this situation that I'm in. So I'll get chemo and I'll go to work. Now, there has been the last 2 times, as the day goes on, the day that you get the chemo, and that takes the better part of 6 hours, I'll go to work and I'll do, say, the 5:30 to 6 o'clock newscast, but I'm just wiped out, and I'll tell the boss, I'm not going to make it through the 11, and you don't want me on the air at 11. So, I've missed a couple of newscasts, but I haven't missed much work because of it. I just try to push through and do what I can. So on the bike, normally this time of year, I'm not one of your RAM people. I'm so impressed.
There aren't many.
I'm so impressed. My normal riding in 50 to 50 miles recreationally, averaging between 14 and 16 miles an hour. That would be my normal. And last night I went out and I rode on our flat greenway for 15 miles and averaged probably between 12 and 13 miles an hour on my gravel bike, just kind of sitting upright and talking to my buddy next to me. And, and that's cycling for me right now. So, but at least I'm out there riding, and then I went back to work after that, so that was my dinner break. So that's kind of how I'm dealing with it. You just push through and you do the best you can. But there are days when you just don't feel like getting out of bed, really.
John, you are truly amazing. So I'm just in awe of your perseverance through all of this. This is pretty amazing.
So what happened was I told my story on the air. As we're taping this, it's probably been a couple of weeks ago, because my face, you sort of get the moon face from the prednisone. Did you get that? Mm-hmm. Also, mm-hmm. Did you have the big moon? A little bit,
face? Yeah. A lot of swelling.
I was on. So I finally felt like I had to explain to viewers why I looked like this. I have these little squinty eyes, and this is not the me that viewers have known since I've been on the air. And The upshot is that I've been contacted by people like Lee, and that's why I'm on your show right now, and from all over the country, because the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research found my story and they distributed through their email list. So I've been just covered up with stories from people who suffered from sarcoidosis or some other autoimmune disease. And there's so many out there that I haven't even heard of, but with similar type results and people suffering from similar side effects. So my goal now is to tell people about this and spread the word. So many people said I'm just suffering by myself. And they've had much worse conditions than me. One lady wrote that her daughter is deceased because of it, because it spread to all of her organs, that's very rare. But sometimes this thing will lodge in your in a heart valve, or most often it shows up in your lungs. A lot of people have it in their lungs and don't know it; they just have shortness of breath. But it can be a real problem for people. And I've just been contacted by so many people since this story went live. And so now whatever I can do to spread the word and to help people understand, what a struggle, what a terrible disease this is, and hopefully, get some people behind some research. And coming up, I'll tell you about a ride that we're doing this year, and I helped start it last year. It's a Fondo here in Virginia. It's called Virginia's Blue Ridge Fondo, and it starts and ends at a beautiful local brewery. It's the Ballast Point Brewery, and a lot of people are familiar with Ballast Point, right? So they have an East Coast center that's right here in the Roanoke area, and they let us start and finish the ride there. And you ride off through, along the James River, and it's just beautiful. And so I'm hoping to talk to some of the folks with the FSR, and then talk with my committee and see if I can make that a fundraiser. I will plan to ride it. There are different length options at this point. If I can get the prednisone tapered down enough by the end of the summer, maybe I did the 50 last year. I would like to think I could maybe do the 50. Right now that'd be impossible, but I don't. I've got to wait and see what the doctors say about the chemo and so forth. But if I went out there and did the 25, and we had a group of people that were all there who came to raise money for sarcoidosis, I would find some way to participate. So, the hard part is I think mentally, I've always been reasonably nimble. I'm a fly fisherman. I can always hop around on the rocks and get to the spot where I need to be to throw my fly in the right place. And I can't do any of that anymore. I mean, sometimes getting out of a car is difficult. Having to accept the fact that I will never be able to do those things again. I'm hesitant to even say, "Oh, poor me." It's hard to get out of the car when you got folks who are in wheelchairs or bedridden or have lost limbs. One guy wrote, he said they took out all of my thigh muscles, my quads on one leg. Compared to him, what I have is a paper cut, and all the doctor's appointments and dealing with all of the after effects, and then deciding on a given day, am I being lazy or am I really wiped out because they just gave me a dose of poison in my body?
I'll be honest, John. I am so impressed with your attitude, dealing with new normals, right?
Yes, that's my new normal. We use that a lot. Hey, Lee.
Excuse me for jumping in here, Becky.
No.
Oh, no,
But
go ahead.
First of all, John, we're recording this just a few days after the Dayton Memorial Day tornadoes, which missed me by about a block, for which I'm thankful. I just want to say thank you to you guys out there in the news business for what you do.
Well,
these guys here in Dayton, they were remarkable. We sat there with my phone and our TV as long as we had power, and we knew exactly where that thing was and where it was coming, and we knew when to hit the bathroom. I can't say enough for you guys and what you do.
Well, we have a dedicated team here at Channel 10 as well, and whenever there's a tornado warning, we go wall to wall the programming.
If I might jump in here a little bit, what I have isn't nearly, Becky, as serious as what John has, but probably more typical. As John knows, there's people that have sarcoidosis and don't even know it. It goes away. And on the other hand, on the other end of the spectrum, it can lead, as he mentioned, to death. Fortunately, that's a very rare occasion.
Yeah.
But John, I was diagnosed back in 2001. And how that came about is sort of interesting. I was riding with a group of friends that we'd ridden together for years. And we rode together twice a week in the morning, kind of a brunch ride. We anywhere from 40 to 60 miles. And in the spring of 2001, instead of riding along and chatting with them, I was riding along and struggling to keep up. And toward the end of the summer, I was at the tail end just trying to draft off of them. And then on one day at the end of a hill climb, I was dropped and I knew something was wrong.
Right.
I couldn't figure it out. So my doctor gets a big laugh out of this, fortunately, but I went home and I lay on the couch, turned the television on, and one of these commercials for a drug came on that helps pay John's salary, I would suppose.
Sure.
But it came on and it said, "Do you get tired? Have you lost interest in things you used to like to do? And you may be depressed. And we have this magic pill that'll fix it." And I self-diagnosed. I'm depressed. I called my doctor up. I need an appointment. And I walked in and I said, "Doctor, I'm depressed." And my doctor wasn't one of these kind of person that says, "Okay, you're depressed. Here's a prescription, next patient,"
Right.
She sat down and talked to me. She said, "Lee, I've known you a long time, and you're not the kind of person I would think would get depressed." Asked me a few questions. 9/11 had just happened. Are you worried about something? Well, my pension fund had just blown to pieces. Yeah, I was worried about that. But when I mentioned the cycling, she says, "This is not depression. Something else is going on." And that led to a X-ray. It led to a CAT scan. And as you explained, on these images, sarcoidosis looks almost exactly like cancer.
It does.
And of course, that was the big thing. It's I think you experienced this. It's a relief to be diagnosed with sarcoidosis, John.
Because it's not cancer. Yeah.
Because it's not cancer.
Right.
But my pulmonologist was very conservative. And when I finally got the diagnosis and got to see him, he said, "I'm not going to put you on prednisone." My doctor finally decided that I was dormant. In other words, the disease was no longer progressing. I don't know what your stage is, John, and just watched me real closely. I kept getting X-rays, every couple of months, CAT scans and that kind of thing, and decided I was dormant. I did go on prednisone for a while a few years ago when he thought it might be reactivating, and he kept me on it until he had decided that it might have been a little flare-up, but it really wasn't active again. As I understand it, I don't know what you understand, John, but there's no known cause. They think it might be autoimmune that is triggered by an environmental situation. Nobody knows for sure. There's no cure. There are some things to ameliorate it. I kept on riding after that. I could still do century rides. I did for a while, but gradually over time, now remember, I was 66 when I was diagnosed. And gradually over time, your lungs cease to be so elastic, and aging plus that has taken its toll. And as any of you who have lung problems know, that anything that happens, allergies, colds, anything like that, just exacerbate the situation. I've done pretty well. My doctor again tells me, he said, "I never expected you to do this well." But he said, "I think all those years on the bike gave you an edge as far as lung capacity that many of my patients do not have." I not only credit cycling for getting me diagnosed earlier, but also for helping me along. So gradually, the bike had to go. I got involved in the race across America. with the time stations, and eventually morphed into this show. Fortunately, I have helpers like Becky and Chuck Stiver, who drives to the races for me to help me. But then again, I'm 83 years old, and you expect a little slowdown in life, but I didn't expect this to happen. But I agree with you, John. You were the guy that could do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I just crewed for my son and daughter-in-law at the tour of the Scioto River Valley. And I have to tell you, I sit there or watch these people go by, and I do get a tear in my eye. There's no denying it. And dealing with that phase of it is hard as any of it.
Yeah, it really is. And that's the thing is, I think the fact that you're still out there and involved in cycling at what, 83?
83.
Well, if there's one person who's impressive in this group, I'm gonna give Lee the ribbon.
Well,
Sure.
I don't deserve any ribbons. I love doing this show. It's been a compensation for me. My wife says it keeps me out of her hair.
And you talk about the bicycle, and my doctors have also said similar things about how the bicycle is definitely a game changer in terms of being healthy and fit, and maybe beating this thing. Mine is not spreading. I just had an MRI at the Cleveland Clinic, and they said that it's the prednisone and the chemo appears to be working in terms of containing this. And I did have a bad flare up back in December, which is when they put me back on the prednisone. My 2017 was a pretty good year. I was doing the Remicade treatments, very few side effects. Was riding my bike somewhat normally, and the thing that I worry about is losing the ability to ride the bicycle. And that seems to be front and center. Every time I get a diagnosis or an update, I think the first thing I think of is am I going to be able to ride my bike? And I don't know. I just don't know what it is about the darn bike, but I can't stay off of it. I love it. And it is a driving force in my life. And if people are watching this because they're familiar with RAM, I assume they have similar feelings. Maybe they never stop to think about it. But for me, when you all of a sudden are faced with the prospect of you might not be able to ride that bike, then every time you get on it, no matter how long or short the ride or whatever, it's like you stole one from the disease. That's the cycling side of this thing. And it really, it is very real. And I do think it makes a big difference in being able to fight sarcoidosis. So we'll see. So that's a little bit about my blog. And then the FSR people, the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research, I'll be having a call with them later this week. I wish I could tell you more right now, but I want to find a way to try and help them use cycling in a positive way. They do sponsor some 5Ks, and they've got some people that get behind some fundraising efforts on running, and I believe maybe a couple of cycling events. And if I can create a situation where that happens, I'll be sure, Becky and Lee, to tell you, and hopefully you can help me get the word out. But we'd love to have people come to the Roanoke area. We call it Virginia's Blue Ridge, which is a 5-county area sort of surrounding Roanoke and the mountains here in Western Virginia. And the Ryan Blue Ridge Parkway goes, literally it's a third of a mile from where I'm sitting. And that's just absolutely gorgeous riding with the overlooks and so forth. And if we can somehow help combat sarcoidosis, which is such a rare disease, the big pharmaceutical companies aren't really researching it a lot because there's no money in it. If they treated all of us, there's just not enough of us to make a difference. So I spoke with my doctors at the Cleveland Clinic, and they're frustrated by the lack of research dollars for it. So whatever we can do to raise awareness or raise some money or whatever. If the cycling community wants to get behind this, if somebody's out there and all of a sudden they're off the back like Lee was, and they find out they have it, they'd understand. They would understand,
Yeah.
So
no, I think this has been incredibly helpful to understand, what sarcoidosis is, what the challenges are, and just, how the cycling community can really come up and help. So this has been really helpful.
Okay, and in the show notes, we will have a link to John's blog. We will have a link there to an article in the Cleveland Clinic website about sarcoidosis, and also some other links. John, if we can get a link to the Grand Fondo you're going to have there, that would be great.
Yep. Definitely do that.
Well, before we end this, I just want to shout out to Ryan Heidenfeld up in Michigan. I was hoping we might get him on the show as well. Ryan is an ultracyclist. Met him a number of times. He has sarcoidosis in the eyes. He has to get steroid shots into the eye periodically. Like you said, John, poor me, I can't even, I couldn't wear contacts. I can hardly put drops in my eyes.
No kidding. Wow.
But he's doing well, and sometimes he's had to quit riding because of the failure of, what do they call it, detached retina. And forgive me, Ryan, if I get your story all screwed up, but I did want to give a shout out to Ryan. We were both talking before you came here. We're a little nervous about having a professional here.
I mean, it was pretty special to have both of you on about that. Thank you, John, for your time and telling us all about sarcoidosis, and hopefully we can get the word out and help the effort in battling sarcoidosis. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on and the opportunity to spread the word.
And thank you for letting me tell my story. I've never told it here before.
Well, Lee, that's, if nothing else, me telling my story got you to tell your story, and if we can multiply that a bunch of times, then more people will know about this disease, and we can get on the way to raising awareness and then funds and then fix it.
Thank you, John, for sharing your story. It has been personally helpful to me to hear you, another person who suffers from this disease. I don't really suffer. And thank you, Becky, once again for hosting the show. Everybody be sure to check the show notes to learn more about this disease. And if you'd like to leave a little contribution there for the Sarcoid Research Foundation, we'd both be very grateful for that. So we'll see you again in the fall. Goodbye.
Music by Kevin MacLeod.
The disease was dormant.
I'll make noise.
John, you may know that we don't have a clue as to what we're doing.
You know what? You're telling stories, and that's all that matters. That's what matters.